There are loads of different language learning methods out there on the internet, and it can be confusing to say the least. So in this video, we're going to be finding out exactly what language learning method is the most suitable one for you. Let's get started. So this video is going to consist of three main parts. The first part is going to be discussing the different factors that we need to consider before we decide on a language learning method for ourselves. The second part is going to be looking at some of the more common, more popular language learning methods, finding out a bit about them and learn. Before in the third part, we discuss the advantages and the disadvantages of each of these learning methods before pulling everything together and seeing what kind of person would each of these types of language learning methods be suitable for. So if that sounds good to you, let's get started. By the way guys, if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell before we get into this video. Okay, so part one, what kind of factors are going to influence your decision about which language learning method to choose? Well, first of all, you've got to consider your goals. So I want you to kind of really think about what is the point of you learning this language? Like what do you want to be able to do with the language? So for example, if your goal is really heavily focused on speaking, you're probably not going to pick a language learning method that doesn't really emphasize that aspect at all. And at the same time, if your goal is to try and pass a language exam, choosing a method which doesn't really incorporate any kind of practicing of like the kind of skills you need to pass a language exam, which might be quite different to what you need in order to speak well, for example, isn't going to be very suitable for you either. So the next factor I want you guys to consider is how much time can you commit to language learning each day? And I say each day, not each week. So you want to kind of write down how long you could be committing. So for example, if you can only commit 10 minutes a day, trying to go on an all-out input method, which we'll get into later, and it's not really going to work because you've only got 10 minutes to work with. You can't really get a lot of input in that time. But at the same time, if you can spend all day studying a language, you don't want to be just spending all your time, I don't know, like memorizing vocab all day, every day, because you'll quickly burn out. So it's about working out how much time you can commit to each day, and in part 3 we'll kind of go into this in a bit more detail after we've discussed the different language learning methods that are out there. So the next factor I want you guys to consider is, what do you want your rate of progress to be? So are you willing to put in less effort to make kind of slower progress over a longer period of time? Because I don't know, for example, your job's really tiring. By the time you get home, the last thing you want to do is like have to do some really kind of energy consuming activities in language learning. You just want to enjoy yourself and kind of take it at a slow pace. Then the method you pick will be very different to if you really want to get really, really good at this language really fast because you need to move to that country soon, for example. And finally, the last factor I want you guys to consider is your personality. So if you are naturally more extroverted, making your whole language routine based around listening and just listening all day, every day, you're probably going to feel that lack of like human connection in language learning, which you'd probably need as an extrovert. However, if you're very introverted, then going through a routine which is kind of all focused on speaking, practice and conversations is very quickly going to lead to you being burnt out, tired, and probably even quite anxious because of the fact that in your native language, you're not one of those people who is really outgoing. So I really consider your personality as well before making a decision. So part 2, we're going to be talking about 5 common language learning methods and discussing each of them, what they consist of. So the first approach we're going to discuss is an input-based approach. Now this kind of approach is popularized by influencers such as Steve Kaufman and the linguistics professor Stephen Krashen. Now, this is based around Stephen Krashen's input hypothesis. So the idea is that in order to get really competent and really proficient in a language, the best way to do that is consume loads of content in that language at a level that you can understand. So that means lots and lots of listening and reading on a daily basis. But the key point of this method is that you're listening and reading to things that are just slightly above your current abilities so that you're able to, what Stephen Krashen describes as acquire them, so kind of learning them without really realizing. So this is quite a low effort method because you're literally just listening and reading quite passively. So the next method we're going to be talking about very briefly, we'll get into these in more detail in part 3 where we kind of go through the advantages and the disadvantages of each of them, is the output-based approach. So the output-based approach is popularized by YouTube phenomenon Xiaoma. and where he kind of goes out and has loads of conversations in Chinese, and that's how he learned Chinese, and also by Benny Lewis. So these kind of approaches are saying that you should go out and have conversations from day one, and you should spend the majority of your time kind of having conversations in the language. You're going to speaking to native speakers, and as long as you can get your points across, even if you make loads of mistakes, for example, it doesn't really matter too much, because you're going to kind of gradually get better the more conversations you have. And the third language learning method we're going to be talking about, which has become really popular in recent years, is this idea of immersion learning. So this is popularized by Math vs Japan and other kind of famous YouTubers in that sense. And what they recommend, what kind of their routine looks like, is doing loads and loads and loads of listening, loads and loads of reading. So kind of mainly based on an input-based approach, actually similar to Steve Kaufman and Stephen Krashen. However, they also combine this with having like a spaced repetition system on the side, to put new words in, where you kind of learn to recognize them. So you have, like, for example, the target language on the front, or your native language, or an explanation in the target language on the back of a flashcard, and you review these regularly as well to try and kind of increase your reading and your kind of speed up the process of getting better at listening and reading. And the next kind of slightly less popular nowadays is the traditional classroom learning. So this consists of sitting in the classroom. Usually it will be kind of mainly based around grammar and understanding the mechanics of the language. And potentially, if you've got a teacher that's quite interested in getting students speaking, then there might be a lot of having the teacher asks questions and gets students to reply in the target language. And finally, the last method that we're going to be covering more is my method. No, only joking. I don't know what to call it. So my kind of method was to take a bit of each of these. So there's bits that I like from each of them. So I do a lot of listening and reading. I get a load of input. I do a load of speaking practice. I do flashcards on the side with my kind of own little method of doing so. And I also do parts of the traditional language learning, but very rarely, just if I need to understand how something works, like the kind of mechanics, like a tiny bit of grammar study, but really almost negligible. So part 3, we're going to be choosing a method. Now we're going to be talking about the disadvantages and the advantages of each method and what kind of person these would suit. So let's get straight into it. So an input-based approach. Now, this would be really suitable for someone who can put a lot of time into language learning, because even Steve Kaufman says, like, you're probably going to need at least 2 or 3 hours a day. That's his kind of recommendation for how much time he puts into language learning using this method, and potentially even more than that. So you need to be able to put in a fair amount of time in order for inputs to work. The reason being that with inputs, you're exposing yourself to new things every day, but if you're not listening loads and loads, you're not going to get much repetition, so you're probably not going to remember a lot of these new things that you're coming across in the input that you're consuming. It's also good for someone who isn't in a rush to speak. So with an input-based approach, you're probably not going to be practicing speaking for quite a while. The whole point of the input-based approach is that you kind of let it come out naturally after a long time of doing lots and lots of input. So if you're not in a rush to speak and get good at speaking straight away, then this would also be good for you as well. And it's quite good as well for someone who kind of like wants a low effort approach. So for a lot of people, it's really hard to actually sit down and do really, hard things like studying. And I totally get that. Like, if you're really tired after a long day at work or whatever, the last thing you want to do is like open a textbook or like memorize some vocab, right? But it's a lot easier to convince yourself to kind of read a book that you're really enjoying in the language, or listening to a podcast that you really enjoy in your language. And you can easily find kind of those slots during the day in which input can fit into nicely. And finally, in terms of personality, so introverts would probably find speaking practice quite daunting. And even if you're not introverted, you'll probably find speaking practice quite daunting. So the fact that input kind of delays the speaking phase to quite late on, like after you've got a really good base from loads of listening and reading, that might also be quite suitable for someone who's quite introverted and is a bit scared of going out and speaking. So listening is a lot less daunting in that sense. The second method, an output-based approach. So this is suitable for extroverts. Obviously, if you're very extroverted, as I said earlier, like doing lots and lots of conversations and stuff, it's probably going to really energize you and really motivate you. So I definitely consider this kind of method if you're very, very extroverted and outgoing. If you really enjoy predominantly learning through conversation, then again, this is something really good for you. And at the same time, you've got to not be afraid of making mistakes. So, because the whole point is, like, if you start speaking from early on, you are going to make lots of mistakes. And so the next one again is immersion learning. So this is again quite suitable for introverts because it kind of involves lots of consuming of native content. Well, at lower levels, probably more content designed for beginners and intermediates, and then eventually consuming native content. It's good for someone who can commit, again, a lot of time every day to language learning. The kind of people that have popularized this method literally spend like 8 hours a day learning a language. So, and in all fairness, that was like learning Japanese, as where this kind of immersion learning has mainly come from, which does require an awful lot of time anyway. So yes, you could probably get away with doing a lot less than that, but it is worth considering that the people who have done really well with kind of immersion learning have had to put in a lot of time. That's one of the kind of drawbacks. This is a good balance between some kind of dedicated study with using their use of sentence mining and kind of flashcards. So it'll probably be, the progress would probably be a little bit faster and going pure, like probably quite a lot faster, than pure input based approach. But at the same time, it is focused on getting loads and loads of input, which makes it a lot less daunting, again, for introverts. Briefly talk about traditional classroom learning. So if you like being committed to being in a specific place at a specific time, and that kind of helps you stay motivated, and it means that you'll actually go and do it, then traditional classroom learning could potentially be an option for you. If you like understanding how everything works, so understanding the grammar, you can't accept it's just that's the way it's said in X language. If you can't accept that and you want to understand why, then maybe considering traditional classroom learning would be good for you. So another key advantage of traditional classroom learning that I would really consider is if you need to do language exams, you probably need traditional classroom learning to kind of help you get through that, because it's a whole different skill set compared to some of the other methods that we've talked about in this video. So I'd really recommend it from that sense. So it's quite good if you need to stay committed, and because you've paid this money to be in this place at this time, then that can be good. I mean, the disadvantages of traditional classroom learning is you're probably not going to get much input and output, so you're probably not going to get much practice of speaking. You're not really going to get to do lots of listening and reading in the short periods of time with lots of students that you would get in a traditional classroom learning setting. And also, a lot of the time you end up learning kind of textbook target language, so as opposed to like kind of real authentic native target language. So maybe combining traditional language learning with something else, depending on your situation, would be good too. My method, I feel really weird calling that, but like kind of my method is a blend of all of these, right? So it's good if you can be self-disciplined, because you're not committing yourself to being in a set place, set time of like traditional classroom learning. And so you need quite good time management to try and fit all of these different activities into your day, into your week, because you're going to have like a mix of, with my kind of method, I have a mix of speaking practice and also listening and reading and output and a bit of dedicated study as well. So that's 3 things, as opposed to some of these other methods which might just be 1 or 2. So you've got to kind of plan carefully in order to get those into your day. But if you kind of a mix like me of kind of somewhat introverted but also a bit outroverted as well in some situations, then this would be quite suitable for your personality type. For me, this really helped me make really big progress really fast, so I got to see results quite quickly as well. So another kind of thing I'd like to say about my method is, if you believe in the power of small habits giving you a big return in the long term, and you're willing to kind of take the time in order to make some good habits, then again, this could be suitable for you. And finally, the kind of disadvantage of this method is because it requires a lot of like using cognitively demanding techniques like active recall, speaking to yourself, speaking to other people. These things, like in a foreign language, that can be really tiring. So if you simply just don't have the energy to kind of do these things as well, then maybe this would be a bit less suitable for you. But there's kind of a drawback. That's a drawback, but at the same time it is an advantage as well. So things like active recall they really do make a difference. So there's kind of advantages and disadvantages to each. I really hope that overview of kind of who I think these methods would be suitable for has really helped you, and that you can then go and make a decision based on that. So let me know down in the comments below, based on that, of those 5 methods, what one would you choose based on your situation and why? I'd really like to hear more about your experience. So finally, having said all of that, I just want to make a few more points that I know this video is getting quite long. Don't listen to anyone that says something along the lines of, this is the only way to learn a language. There's no single correct way to learn a language. Pretty much anything will work as long as you put enough time into it. So it's about finding something that works for you, something that fits your lifestyle and your personality. Also, before you pick a method and stick to it rigorously, no matter whether it's one of these 5 or something else that you find, I want you to ask yourself, is the person that's recommending this method, are they at a level that you want to be at in future? Because I see it all the time on the internet. There's people out there recommend a language learning method saying this is the best way to learn a language in the whole world. That if you're not doing it my way, you're doing it wrong. But hang on a minute, I'm not actually fluent myself. So I'd be a bit careful and wary of things like that. People that are saying that there's only one way, and also that, especially when they're not reaching like a good level that you'd like to be at yourself. So I'd really want to kind of warn you off that. So be a bit careful. I want to make a final point, that is, you don't need to stick to one method, right? There's like all these different kind of groups going around on the internet where they're like, oh, this is our method, like we're tied to this. Like, you can take bits that you like from each one. That's exactly how I made my kind of own bespoke method for learning Mandarin quite fast, is that I kind of took the things that I liked from all these different methods that are being thrown around on the internet, and I'd encourage you to do the same. Find what works for you and your schedule, and then kind of adjust as you go along, and then you'll have your own bespoke method that'll probably be better and work better for you than anything that's being said online. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. If that's helped you today, please give me a like and subscribe to this channel if you can. And let me know down, again, I just want to encourage you, let me know what you think down below in the comments regarding what kind of method should you choose to learn a language, and what have you chosen, and how that's working out for you. I'd really like to hear. Okay guys, alright, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye for now.